So our next presentation, as I cue it up, is going to be called Platonic Solids of Quality. John Mitchell, as you see in front of us, will deliver a content-rich talk about Crispin's testing quadrants, the testing pyramid, and multiple agile feedback cycles. Let's give a round of applause.
Right, so thank you very much. Can you guys hear me? Yep, cool. Today is Platonic Solids of Quality. This is actually cool because I'm glad that everybody uses other stuff besides Django and Python, because this really has nothing to do with Django or Python. But it is, we are writing software where we actually would like to have our stuff work and that kind of thing. This is a super interactive presentation. If you guys want to heckle or throw beer or something like that, it's all cool. Yeah. Yay. I want to thank Keith because he said this is his second talk, and I think he did a spectacular job. So thank you to Keith. I'd also like to thank the data science peoples. Colin, are you still around? Oh, I guess he's vanished. Marcel, Keith, the Black Tux for paying me money, and Don for doing the AV, and my partner Gus, because she's awesome. Right, I work at the Black Tux. Yes, we're hiring. Today is the Platonic Solids of Quality. Who knows about the Platonic Solids in general, the geometric forms? This is hilarious. Okay. Plato, many years ago, said, okay, everything's made out of these different elemental forms. I don't entirely understand what he was talking about. He said the earth is made out of cubes because, it all kind of holds together, whereas water falls through your fingers, therefore it's made of this very complicated dodecahedron. And the sky has the 12 elements of the zodiac, therefore it's a 12-sided die or something like that. Maybe you could ask Keith later what exactly this means. But anyways, this was actually a super important thing for all the philosophers of the day. They actually paid a lot of attention to this stuff and said, okay, well, if we're looking at Earth, then we're going to make it's made out of cubes. This is a super awesome representation of what I'm going to be talking about. It turns out a lot of the things that you care about for quality are actually represented in this really awesome diagram. Specifically, this has a triangle, a circle, and a square. This is the John Mitchell No Artists Were Injured version of the slide, where you have a square, a circle, and a triangle. The square is basically your business/technology matrix. Who's heard of Lisa Crispin or Agile testing? Okay, most of you people are terrible. You need to go run out and buy the Agile testing book right now. It is super awesome. I have stolen their stuff for every single slide deck I've ever done. The feedback loops is a circle, and testing levels in terms of, different levels of testing we'll talk about in a few minutes. These are super duper simple. None of this is magic, and most of this I did not make up. But when you're doing testing, none of it's really hard. You don't care about testing, you care about quality. So what different features can you apply? What different styles, what different ideas can you steal that will make what you're actually produce higher quality? You don't have to think about it, you can work on another cool project. The Agile testing quadrants is the big one. This is by Lisa Crispin and Danny Gregory, and another person. And Agile testing quadrants is a convenient way to think about how you do testing. And you have 4 quadrants. On the top, you basically have business-facing type things. Business-facing things are like examples or documentation or things like that. The business-facing things are basically the English people, the people who speak English on your team who are not geeks, they talk in business and they understand the top part. So if you're doing examples or business-related things, you want your friends who know English to do these types of quality type metrics. On the bottom are your geek type things like unit testing and scalability and things like that. So that's one dimension of the quadrants. The other dimension is on the left and right, you have build the product. Like when you're building the product, you need a lot of things to make sure your stuff doesn't break. Unit tests, integration tests, maybe documentation. You can write your documentation. You've heard it. How many people write documentation? That's actually more than I expected. So you can write documentation without a working product, and it's called marketing. And the other side is critique the product. You have the product, is it okay? If your buddy writes really awesome software that scales way up to 10 users, and you want 1,000 users, your product is going to be perfectly fine, your documentation is going to be perfectly fine, all your unit tests are going to be perfectly fine, but your product is going to suck because you want 1,000 users and it only supports 10. So these are the agile testing quadrants, where the top part is business facing, the bottom part is technology facing, the left part is you're actually building or creating the product, and the right side is critiquing the product that already exists. So I'm going to give you the first one. This is totally interactive. I'm going to ask lots of questions. The first quadrant on the lower left, you have technology facing, so it's not necessarily in English. And on the left side, you're building the product, you don't necessarily have one. The things in bold are awesome, and you should always use them, which are unit tests and component tests. Who does testing? Or unit tests or automation tests? Oh, that's pretty good. I go to some places and their eyes glaze over. It's hilarious. Right, so business facing. Let's say what business facing, what things can you do in the second quadrant that deals with English and your product doesn't exist yet? I already mentioned documentation. What's another one? Requirements.
User stories.
User stories. What was the next one?
Behavior-driven development.
Behavior-driven development. Those are all spectacular. Did I mention that Black Tux is hiring? I think we could use definitely some more of that. Okay, what else is? It's focused on the product, but it's basically in English, and you can do it without the product existing. Sales. You do not need to apply to Black Tux. Basically, there's a lot of, this is just a convenience, and I'm going to cheat. Functional tests. Checked examples. Checked examples is super awesome because they're basically like high-level, business-level things. Business people can actually write your tests and they can execute, which is super awesome. Story tests, I'm not exactly sure what that is. Prototypes, simulations, and documentation, example stories, something like that. Okay, so the next quadrant is the upper right. That is the business-facing bit, where you already have a product. What types of things give you higher quality, but then you actually have to have a product to do this? Customer feedback. That's fantastic. Okay, what else? Analytics reports. Pretty but expensive dashboards. Those are all excellent, actually, and they're even more excellent because they are not on here. I was thinking more exploratory testing. We do a shitload of QA, and it's ultra incredibly important. And I think that the number one thing that your QA people could do, once your product exists, is do exploratory testing. I mean, all the programmers can do the automation, and nobody really cares, but you have to find the bugs in the beginning, and exploratory testing is how you do that. Scenarios is a business thing, but you basically have to have things. What's next?
Exploratory testing?
What is exploratory testing? Exploratory testing is you have a human QA person and they have the product and they beat the shit out of it and they're like, oh, this doesn't quite work. You know, like the things are shifted off slightly, or you can't click this button because the chat little blob is on there in front. This actually happens. That's what I mean by, is there another term for exploratory testing?
Ad hoc testing.
Ad hoc testing, yes. What else? Smoke testing? No. Any other ones? Scenarios, usability testing. This is also a good one. If your stuff actually works, but then nobody can actually get to it. For instance, let's say, half of your people are blind. You know, and they're using a screen reader. Even if your stuff works totally fine, but then a blind person cannot see it because their browser isn't able to read the descriptions of the images, that means you're cutting out your market. User acceptance testing is also an awesome one, and alpha and beta. Okay, so the last bit of the agile testing is you already have a product and you want to do technology-facing things. What can be in that quadrant?
Performance testing.
Performance testing. What else?
Regression.
Regression testing. Yeah, I think that's excellent. What else?
Code coverage.
Code coverage. I think that would go on the lower left, the first quadrant, because it's technology facing, you don't have the product working. But that's actually excellent. Code coverage, yes.
Integration testing.
Integration testing. I would think that would also go to the lower left because you don't necessarily have to, actually maybe like API testing. I think these are all just slightly ambiguous, like integration testing I think could go in either one of the lower ones. The purpose of this exercise is basically to remind us that we have an infinite amount of these really easy things to do to make our product of better quality. If you have technology people, then they do the things in the bottom. If you have more English people, you do the things in the top. Okay, let's figure out what's in the next one for your product exists and is technology facing. Security testing, lots of the ILD testings, and PSR means performance, scalability, and reliability. Those are all super important, and they generally aren't automated. You generally use like tools, but you don't really automate these things necessarily. So this is basically the Lisa Crispin agile testing quadrant. There's also another dude who came up with the original skeleton called Brian Myrick, and he has some really excellent ideas about how you can get insight about your product. This is the version that you'll see in books. One thing I didn't mention is the lower left stuff. The technology product doesn't exist is usually automated. The functional test, etc., is automated and manual. The exploratory testing is always manual. And then your tools is like your performance stuff. These slides and a blog post are online. I'll post the URL in a minute. So that's it for the square, and we love Snowman. So that's it for the business technology matrix. That's actually the bulk of the hairy stuff. The matrix is really spectacular. You guys should all run, don't walk to get the agile testing book. For feedback loops, we have circles. This is a pretty one where you see in the center you have the things that you do all the time. Test-driven design, you're doing integration testing, you're doing refactoring, you're doing collaboration. You're going to do this like multiple times a day. Then daily you're going to do your stand-up. Who does agile style development? Okay, that's good. So daily you have your different things. Every 2 weeks you have retrospectives, and you get the idea. Each one of these cycles is built into each other, and then you have things in the center which are faster. So you have different levels of circles. This is the John Mitchell No Artists Were Injured version. The thing about these different feedback loops is you can change things from one loop to another. You can turn them on and off. And almost always you don't have one, you have two, because you have lots of feedback loops that are totally, completely separate. The things on the left are basically automated feedback loops. Your editor will highlight and complain if your Python is indented wrong. It knows a little bit if you use Pylint, and you all should. Then your editor will complain if you import a module that doesn't get used, or if you actually try to use a variable that has never been defined. So you do have different loops. And you can change these are not free. You do not necessarily want to run Pylint every time you do a change. But maybe you do. I do because it's awesome. However, like the Black Tux, the dev team decided there are too many false positives. Pylint is notoriously bitchy, and so they decided to turn it off from the pre-commit kind of check-in thing and put it in the continuous integration system. That way they still have the safety of Pylint, but they don't have to look at it and tweak it all the time. On the right side you have manual processes. The stand-ups every day. Even faster than that, you have a code review that could just take minutes or hours. And on the larger scale, you have sprints that last every 2 weeks or Maybe you want to do a bug sprint every quarter or something like that. The point of this is, in the agile style development, you have many feedback loops. They can be computer-based or human-based, and you can change them back and forth. One thing that isn't totally obvious is on the left you have the automated feedback loops, on the right you have the manual ones. The automated ones tend to be on the lower left-hand corner, unit tests and component tests. And the manual ones tend to be in the upper right corner. You have user acceptance and so forth. These are things that require humans and that you want to get feedback on. Hey, I did a change, did I break anything? So you use a manual process and use the upper right. But it's all a feedback loop. We love the snowman. Questions? And you guys are relaxed. Right, so for the,
I have a question.
yes.
So, out of the things that, so what would you say in your experience is something that people most often miss out of those steps, especially the circular feedback loop, that they should not be missing?
So the question is, in practice, what are things that people might miss, in practice miss from the different feedback loops?
Yeah, that you personally
That I personally have seen. One is, if you use VI, then you tend not to have, it doesn't highlight you on like your syntax errors and things like that. And I guess that's not terrible. Emacs will do,
Get plugins for it.
you can get plugins for it, it's okay. So VI is cool. I use Sublime with the Pylint plugin because the Pylint plugin, although it's kind of awkward and it bitches a lot, it will, like if you run the code in production and you hit a variable that's never been seen before, your stuff is immediately going to crash and somebody's going to get really, really mad at you. So if you could never ever do that because you're running your Pylint plugin like constantly, then I will be much happier and I will not come over and stand at your desk and do this death grip kind of thing. That's the number one thing actually. I think that, I mean, who uses continuous integration? Okay, a number. Okay, all the rest of you please go into continuous integration. It gives you a lot of, you can do a bunch of bullshit and then put it in the computer so you never have to think about it again. Continuous integration has a lot of advantages. What do other people miss? Some places aren't big enough to have QA staff. That's kind of a bummer, but that's kind of outside the scope of this, so we're going to skip that one. Well, it's a question for the audience. What do people do what do people miss that they should be doing? And you guys are super relaxed. All right, what's up?
In the upper right quadrant, a lot of the manual stuff, those remind me of words I read in not only books about lean, but not coincidentally because they have a lot of similarities, books about UX. Because UX is kind of, I believe, the most scientific approach to design because they don't care about the genius of the designer, how amazing you think you are, or how amazing the designer thinks they are. They only care about user feedback and if things work in the real world. So there's a lot of user testing, there's a lot of manual, which is why I kind of don't like it. There's a lot of manual, kind of human-facing validation of everything. And properly used, it dramatically decreases the chance that you're going to wander down a weird side road and build a product that no one likes and no one uses and it doesn't solve the problem.
So if I can translate that into something, Marcel is a huge fan of UX. Specifically, if you have a human person who looks at every single change, that means that when you actually get a product, people will actually use it because it's fun to use. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
Fair assessment, okay, cool. Cool, we love snowman. Another question.
Something that people don't do enough of is dog fooding.
What is that?
Dog fooding.
Dog fooding.
Yeah. People sometimes they build products without even using it, so that's where it gets the wrong way. If you use products, if something is wrong, you know it's
So the point is, if the question is, what do people not really do that would improve the quality of your product? And one potential answer is dog fooding. If you have to use your product every day, that means that you will definitely, if not fix, you will definitely be knowing all the issues with it. That's an excellent point. It's actually a challenge for me because my product is renting tuxedos, and I don't do that every day or week. So, but I think that is valuable because I do use our website and I do find issues with it. So more questions.
Yeah, I mean, I said sales. I was really only half joking. And one of the things that's missing there, and I think that we as developers miss a lot, is customer interviews. Getting out there in the field and actually talking to customers and seeing if it's something they actually want. If you want this, what would it look like? And I think from building a product standpoint, on the business side of the product, that's very important. I didn't see it on my list. That's something else.
Okay. So the potential way to get higher quality is to sit down with your customers and actually talk to them and see what they would want, i.e. do marketing, and well, I guess sales is more appropriate. And I think that is a fantastic, this is an extremely biased list, definitely towards developers. We pretend that our product managers know everything and our product managers know what the customers want. But you're right, this is very biased. Another question.
Just comment on the higher quality is code reviews.
Code reviews. Who does code reviews? Okay, all the rest of people are all bad people. You should need to do code reviews every day. In fact, that's a good question. Where do code reviews fit on this? Bottom left. Yeah, I think that's probably good. What about top left? Okay, so the product doesn't necessarily exist, so it's definitely the left half. Is it more English or is it more tech? I think for a code reviews can have multiple purposes. If you don't know what you're doing, you're like, hey, I'm doing this thing, does this make any sense whatsoever? I think it would be in the upper left. But if you're doing a code review for, hey, I'm doing this thing, I know exactly what it is, I want to put it in production right now, could you double check it? I think that's the lower left. So you could use the same technique for two completely different purposes.
Just to piggyback, I think UX is kind of, a good UX practice does exactly what you're getting at. There's somebody technical looking at doing firsthand with that user responses. And I was just going to add, I think it's easy for developers to get caught in the lower left. And as much as we would like business to be a little smarter about tech, I think most developers, if they took a little bit of a look at more the business side, would find their lives easier because they'd understand more what the context is as opposed to having 100% unit test coverage for a non-functioning product. It's happened, right?
Okay, you've hit on one of my centerpieces. Let's see if I can say what you said as opposed to my voices. You said it is a, developers, especially me, tend to get stuck in the lower left. They're like, oh, this is really awesome, let's run this a million times and automate it, etc. Versus, on the business level, how do you actually create a product that actually somebody actually cares about? And it would be nice if the developers actually had a recognition that this is actually a good way to do negative productivity. If you write unit tests for features that don't actually get executed in your running website, you are doing negative productivity and you're carrying along the source code and the tests for forever. And I've never done this, of course. But that is an excellent way to do negative productivity. One more question? Yes? No? All right, so this agile testing stuff is super useful. Feedback loops, testing levels. This is the prettiest picture I found of testing levels. UI tests, service tests, and unit tests. Who does who does web stuff versus like data science? Who does web stuff? Okay, a good number. How many people do like data science stuff? What do the rest of you people do? Come on,
Entertainment.
entertainment. All right, I'm gonna pretend all you guys are web people, because I'm a web people. In the web world, which is not everything, you have basically three-ish types of tests. The user interface tests, which are a huge pain in the ass because you have to use a real browser with JavaScript and some stuff like that. But if 100% of your user base is using a browser, you have to test your browser. Service level is sort of more technical, so it's more fun, but you're dealing with like databases and your payment system and so forth, so you have to test it at an intermediate level. And on the bottom are unit tests. My favorite are unit tests because you look in the lower left and lower right. Unit tests are really fast and they're really cheap to do. But it doesn't really help you a lot because you need browser level tests. This is my version of that same thing. UI tests on the top, API, then unit tests. On the bottom, on the right, you can see that unit tests are nice, but they only cover a certain amount of code. A certain unit test only executes 10, 20, 100 lines of code, which means if you have a bug somewhere else, you're never going to see it. If you do a single user interface test, this is fantastic because you do an entire view, maybe a couple of APIs, and a whole bunch of different things at the bottom, which means that the single API test, even though it's slow and kind of awkward and a pain in the ass and tends to break, it tends to execute a lot of code, therefore it's very valuable. So basically each test, like the top level test covers a lot of code and the lower level test only covers a small amount of code. But that doesn't really show you the entire bit of information. On the right, since you're just executing 50 or 100 lines of code, you can actually mock all the database stuff. You can check every single field within the request. You can check everything within the response. You get a lot of high quality information out of your small test, even though it executes only just like 50 lines of code. On the left side, you have a user interface test with JavaScript and a bunch of API calls and so forth. But if you're like dorking around with the browser, how are you going to mock your database calls? How are you going to mock your API calls? How are you going to do all this stuff? And more importantly, even if you did mock all this stuff, how are you going to check every single data value from every single function and every single API? So on the left side, the answer is you don't. And so the left side is you get a test, it executes a bunch of your code, but it doesn't actually check every single value. So it's basically like a click-through test. And this is the reality of web testing, is you have really good unit tests, which are really awesome, and you have really cranky click-through tests, which don't give you that much data. So what I suggest is doing it this way. Unless you're much smarter than me, you can figure out how to do everything with just high-level tests, which would be awesome. Talk to me later. I would suggest you do it this way. Write a bunch of lower-level tests, which are fast, and check every single result in the response, so that you have lots of high-quality, low-level tests, which are really fast. You're going to have a lot of them because they only execute 50 statements or so. And then once you have one or two user interface tests, it doesn't matter about checking the output because you've already checked it. The lower level high quality tests support the high level user interface tests. And that's the point of this entire triangle about you do a few user interface tests because you have to and because you want to click through your site, but you don't care about any of the data whatsoever. On the bottom level, you care only about individual functions, which are only about 50 lines or so, and you care about all the inputs, you care about all the outputs. And once you have that, then the lower level ones will support the higher level ones. That way you get the highest level of quality. We love Snowman. That's it for Platonic solids of quality. Basically, the square reminds us of the horizontal and the vertical. It also reminds us of user-focused tests versus business level tests versus technology versus automation versus manual. The feedback loops, you can have mechanical feedback loops that happen instantly within your browser, or you can have like quarterly reviews or something like that. You can have manual ones, you can have computer ones. And the triangle reminds us about testing levels. If you have a whole bunch of lower level, high quality tests, then you can get away with just having a couple higher level tests. This is what the ancients used. They thought that the world was made out of cubes, and the air was made out of octahedrons, which makes no sense to me. But anyways, these are reminders of how the world works. And I hope that the Platonic solids of quality will help you guys out in your own quality stuff. Thanks. The slides and everything are in bit.ly/JTA for John Tells All -Platonic.